Editing our photographs is just as important as the process of taking photographs. Selecting the right photograph and getting it to look exactly the way that you envisioned at the time of the photograph takes time and it takes skill. When we were photographing in the past, we developed our film, we carefully chose the images we wanted to print, and we spent hours in the darkroom getting everything right. Now, of course, everything is digital. We have our digital darkrooms that we can even take with us on the go, no matter where we are. We captured an amazing photograph, we want to share it with the world, we can edit it on the go and it can post it up within seconds. There are so many different apps out there, as we've already seen throughout this course, but in this lesson we're going to check out Photoshop and we're going to check out Lightroom, perhaps two of the apps that are most well known when it comes to photo editing, and have wonderful apps that you can use for editing your pictures on the go. My name is William Eames, your course educator. Welcome back to the smartphone photography course. Welcome to module 2, lesson number 7. Now, unsurprisingly, we have a huge amount to cover in this lesson, so we're going to talk all about Lightroom and Photoshop and how you can edit your photographs for perfection. We're going to focus mainly on Lightroom, as it's going to give us as photographers many more options than Photoshop, but Photoshop will allow us to add finishing touches to our photographs. So just a couple of common terms to go over as normal. We're going to have a look at RAW and JPEG files. So we're going to distinguish the difference between those two file types. We'll talk about what Lightroom is. We'll have a look at what Photoshop is. We'll then get into editing through Lightroom and editing through Photoshop Express a little bit later on in the lesson. So first of all, let's talk all about RAW and JPEG in the context of using them to capture our files and also to save them, as when we're saving them within Lightroom and within Photoshop. So first of all, looking at the Lightroom app. Okay, so you can download this for free on the Play Store and indeed on the Apple version of that as well, the Apple Store. And primarily what Lightroom is, it's a DAM program. That means it's Digital Assets Management Program, a digital assets manager, which means it's designed to help us to manage our files. Obviously, we know as photographers we take hundreds and hundreds of photographs, thousands of photographs every year, and it can be very, very difficult to manage all of them when you've got a huge volume of them. So Lightroom allows us to manage those photographs as well as editing them as well. Now, unlike Photoshop, Lightroom is designed specifically for photographers. So Photoshop is a very broad program, as we'll speak about in just a moment. Lightroom is very much just focused on editing for photographers, for managing our images in a convenient way. Now, we can also sync it with Lightroom Classic. So I'll show you Lightroom Classic to put this in context, but basically Lightroom Classic is the desktop version of Lightroom, where we can do a lot more. It's like the full version of the program. We can do a lot more with it than we can do with the mobile app version. Although the mobile app version in truth is still got a huge amount of options that we can use, as we'll see throughout this lesson. But if we make changes in Lightroom CC Classic, it is possible to transfer over our photographs using Creative Cloud onto the Lightroom app. It's also fully compatible with Photoshop, so the idea is that you'd work through through Lightroom first, and then you can open up your images within Photoshop and any other kind of plugins as well. There's loads of other apps that are compatible with it as well. Huge amount of customizable options, as we're going to see, and it can open all types of image files. So we're going to be talking about RAW and JPEG in particular, but if you do have PNGs or anything else like that, it is possible to open them up within Lightroom too. And most importantly, your edits are non-destructive. When we make changes to Lightroom, it's done in a way that is not destructive to your photograph. It's always possible to revert back to your original file. Anytime you save a change to your photograph, what you are doing is making a copy of that image. You're saving it as a completely separate file, but your original file, almost like your negative, is always going to be there for you to edit, to go back to, make changes if needs be, and so on. Now, comparing that to Photoshop Express, it's used for editing photos and creating images. So what I mean by creating images, it is possible to do a little bit more with Photoshop in terms of the design elements, like adding in text, adding in other effects and so on as well. You can use it for editing our photographs, but I think, as we'll see throughout this lesson, Lightroom is better suited for editing our photos compared to Photoshop. However, you may find that you only want to use one app, so you can make a decision whether to use Lightroom or whether to use Photoshop. Now, if you're maybe less just on the photography side of things and you do a little bit more design, you might look at downloading Photoshop and using Photoshop Express primarily. There's a huge editing tools available within it. It is possible to download extra tools for it, although you will have to pay for them unless you are on the Creative Cloud subscription. It is designed with designers and marketers in mind, as well as photographers. As we're going to see, there's certain templates within the actual app itself, very much designed for putting ads on Facebook or putting things on Twitter and so on. So if you are doing a little bit of business side of things, which we are going to be talking about business in the next lesson, there is very quick options here to help you out with that, which is great. There's text options, blur and frame tools, which are unavailable in Lightroom as well. So to kind of add, as I said, finishing touches, we'll find them within Photoshop. And it can also be synced to the Creative Cloud with the paid version. So edits that you make within Photoshop, you can upload your images directly to the Creative Cloud online storage, which then of course could be opened through Lightroom again. So the Creative Cloud syncs all of these Adobe apps together so that anytime you make a change to an image, it goes to the Creative Cloud and you can open it up in another program. Okay, now we mentioned RAW and JPEG. So these are the two primary formats for capturing our photographs. Now, previously JPEG would have been the only option available to us on smartphones, but as the technology has gotten a lot better, RAW format is becoming more and more widely used on these phones, which is a brilliant option. Okay, so JPEGs and RAW, they do have differences. There's a lot of people are, which one is better, and it's hard to say because you can't really say they're not. Well, basically they're not that comparable. This RAW versus JPEG idea. When you understand the differences between the two files, you'll understand when to use each file. They both have a specific purpose. So, first of all, you can set your RAW files in your settings. So go into your phone settings. Sometimes it's just an icon where you can see JPEG or you can see RAW. You just press on it and you can choose your different options. You've got RAW, RAW plus JPEG or JPEG. Okay, and if you choose the RAW plus JPEG option, you're going to get the option to capture two files at the same time. So you take a photograph, it's going to capture it in RAW and it's going to capture in JPEG, which is a great option, but of course it's going to use more memory on your phone. So found in the settings, not all cameras have RAW. So again, it's going to come down to the model of phone that you have. So, if you're using, say, a lower grade phone or perhaps a phone that's a few years old, you may not have the RAW JPEG or the RAW option, so you may need to check it out. Sometimes it might appear as DNG as well. So it might be called DNG, which is digital negative, which is a variation of a RAW file, but it's still a RAW file. Now, how do they differ? Well, the way I've always compared RAW and JPEG files is that take your raw ingredients. So raw means exactly that, it's raw. So raw means exactly that, it's raw. Raw ingredients. Okay, so say you're cooking someone dinner and you decide that you want to make it from scratch. So you go out, you get a nice piece of fish or you get a nice piece of meat. Maybe you're making a vegan meal, so you go out and you get lots of nice fresh vegetables, loads of different ingredients that you can use to create something that's, yours, is your way of cooking, and says something about you. So it's your own way of cooking these these ingredients to create something that hopefully is delicious. Now, say you're in a rush and you haven't got time to cook for somebody and you need to eat, you might get a microwave meal. So microwave meal, essentially the ingredients are already cooked. Okay, so you're just reheating that, those ingredients. And microwave meals, they can be delicious as well in their own right, and they're very, very convenient as well, because they just pop in and go. That's exactly the same with RAW and JPEG. JPEG files have certain changes embedded into the file that cannot be undone. They're embedded into it at the time of capture. So say for example, you apply noise reduction to your photographs in camera. That noise reduction is applied to the JPEG and it cannot be undone. So if you've overdone it in the camera, unfortunately, you're left with that. Similarly with sharpening. So if you sharpen your JPEG file within the camera at the time of capture, it's going to stay embedded into the file. With a RAW file, that doesn't happen. With a RAW file, you get just the raw data and you make all of these changes afterwards. So let's just break that down a little bit more. So a JPEG is a ready to go file. It's designed to be opened in any software. It's designed to be a universal file. It's smaller in file size. It's compressed, which means that it will lose information if compressed repeatedly. So you wouldn't use a JPEG typically for doing repeated editing. It's okay to edit it once, or if you know what you're doing, you can edit it multiple times. But if you keep editing and saving and editing and saving, you are compressing the file to the point where it's going to become pixelated and not look good. It's suitable for printing. So it's designed for printing. If you go into your local camera shop, you want to print off some photographs, you're going to be printing JPEG files. Suitable for sharing, again, posting on Instagram, posting online, sharing in an email. You're going to want to share your JPEG files. But as I said, info is embedded into the file. Sharpness, noise, monochrome, these cannot be undone. They're in the file and you're stuck with them. With a RAW file, it is, and JPEG is an acronym. It stands for Joint Photographics Experts Group. JPEG, Joint Photographic Expert Group. And these were basically the standard, the group that came up with the standard for the file to be opened in pretty much any software. The idea of a JPEG, it can be opened by anyone who has access to any kind of image viewer. Now a RAW file differs is that it's an uncompressed file. So it's a large file. It takes all of the information from the image sensor. There's no changes in it, which means it's a much larger file size. It's not universal, so it's not going to open up in every single program, which is why something like Lightroom is so handy, because it will open up these files for us. It needs to be processed, which means it needs to be edited before it can be printed or shared through software. You can't print from a RAW file directly, and you should never share your RAW files. You should always be sharing a copy, which is a JPEG, with somebody. You should keep your RAW files like they are your negatives. It's a lossless file. It cannot be overwritten. You can't save over a RAW file. You can only make copies of it that you're saving, but your original file will always be there for you to go back to work on. Gives you the maximum dynamic range from your image sensor, so it'll give you the best quality in the sense that you'll see the best possible range of tones in your photographs, but you may need to edit the image to bring some of those tones back. Out of file cameras can look a little bit flat for this reason, because you have to do a little bit of work on them, and they can also be a little bit difficult to understand at the start. RAW is also not an acronym. It means raw as in raw ingredients, raw data. It's just raw. It does not stand for anything. Now, if you were to have a look at a RAW file versus a JPEG file out of camera, you can see here clearly the difference between the two files. The RAW file is a little bit more muted. The colors are slightly different. They're much more vibrant in the JPEG. The JPEG file, probably a little bit difficult to see here, but it is actually a little bit sharper. The white balance is a little bit warmer, and there's a little bit more color in it compared to the RAW file. That's because the RAW file is unedited. We haven't made any changes to the RAW file yet. We need to apply those changes through Lightroom, or indeed through any other app that we have, like Snapseed or Photoshop, that can handle RAW files. So let's move on and let's have a look at how to use Lightroom, and we'll look at the different versions of Lightroom. First of all, there's a lot of confusion between the Lightroom CC, which is the app version, which is what we're going to cover in this lesson, but there's also CC Classic as well, which is the desktop version. So I'm going to run through that one first. Now, before we have a full look at Lightroom Mobile, I just very quickly want to go through the full version of Lightroom. Lightroom CC Classic, or Lightroom CCC, which is the desktop version of Lightroom. So this is available for download from Adobe. It is a subscription service now, so you'd be paying a monthly subscription for it. In the past, you were able to buy it as an outright program as well, but currently it is a subscription service. Now, the idea of Lightroom is that you can organize all your photographs on your computer. You can use it for creating new folders, move images around the different folders. You can, of course, use it for editing as well. And you can also create what are known as collections. And collections basically are they're like playlists for your photographs. So say, for example, if you're familiar with Spotify, if you're familiar with iTunes, and you're making a playlist of your songs, you're essentially doing the exact same thing when you're using collections. Now, collections are important when it comes to Lightroom Mobile, because we use them to sync our photographs with Lightroom Mobile. So if you are paying for Lightroom, if you're paying the subscription service, you will have access to the cloud, to the Adobe CC, the Creative Cloud, which basically means it's storage for your photographs. It's online storage for your photographs. Now, the desktop version of Lightroom, your photographs are still stored on your computer. You're using Lightroom to organize those photographs, but they're still stored on your computer. They're not stored within Lightroom. Lightroom is simply an interface for interacting with your photographs. However, we can sync them to the online cloud storage, and we can do that by using collections. So if you have Lightroom and you want to start using it in conjunction with the Lightroom app, you can sync with Lightroom app, and that way you can access your photographs from your computer on your phone, which is brilliant. So say, for example, I've got a couple of different ones here. I've got this wildlife one. If I click on this and I right click on it, I have an option called sync with Lightroom, and I can just click that off and it will sync then onto the cloud storage. Now, it doesn't happen instantly. It takes a little bit of time for it to sync with it. You can make it public. So if you were sharing this with somebody, for example, you can make it public and it will give you an URL that you can share with them. Okay, now you can see also beside it, we have these little symbols beside each of the thumbnails. They've disappeared there. We now have these little symbols that indicate that these are uploading to Lightroom. Now, to begin syncing, you need to activate it through your account. So you click down your account. Obviously, we're using the Shaw Academy one here, and you can start syncing your photographs here. So you'll have to activate it here initially. Then you create your collections. You right click on your collection, and you can then sync with Lightroom. When you've got that done, you can then go to Help. And you can go to, let me just find it here, always takes me a second, view your synced collections on web. It'll open up a URL for you. There we go. And you can see there's some images, some folders that I have uploaded previously. And as you can see, it's currently uploading. It's nearly finished, or maybe it's uploaded them all. It's uploaded the wildlife folder. So what that means then, when I open the Lightroom app, it is possible for me to access anything that's in the cloud through the app. So it's a really good way of working between the desktop version and between the Lightroom app. But be aware, this is only available if you are paying the subscription service. If you're using the free version of Lightroom, you won't have this access. You won't have this ability to link them together. But you can still do plenty with the free version of Lightroom, as we're going to see now in just a moment. Now, so here we are in the Lightroom app. Okay, so I have some photos here that I've got selected already that I'm going to import into Lightroom. So what I can do here, first of all, is I can come up to the top right hand corner and I can click off and it has select all, or I can choose types of files that I want to import. So I have JPEGs, PNGs, I have RAW files, videos as well, and you can then sort by date, modified, and so on. I am just going to select all for now. Just to make things easier for me, and when I do that, I can just simply hit add. So what this is going to do then is going to bring them into the Lightroom app for me. We'll just click add there again. There we go, just bringing them in. And as you can see here already, we have the two other ones that we uploaded. We've got the street work one, which is one that I shared earlier on my own to test it out. And we have that wildlife folder that we just uploaded there quite recently. Now you can see 13 photos successfully imported. So it takes a little bit of time for them to come in, and they will sync then automatically onto the cloud then as well, provided that you have that feature available to you. Now, so let's get into using the actual doing a little bit of editing. So we'll go to our all photos here, and we can start to edit away. So here you can see it organizes them by date. You can change that, of course, if you like. You can come up to the top. You see there, you can segment by year. You can change whatever way you want to view them. You can view them like this if you prefer. So you've got a couple of options there. The way you can do it, you can go by like none, so it's done it automatically by year. You can switch that off, and it just does it from the last way you imported them. So I am going to we'll leave it by year just for the sake of organization. Now, so let's begin by doing some edits to some photographs. Now, before we do that, actually, I just also want to show you as well that if you hit the bottom right hand corner with the photo icon, the camera icon, you can actually open a camera directly through Lightroom as well. Okay, so here's my recording setup here at the moment. Very, very basic setup that we are using. There's myself in the reflection there as well. But you can take photographs then directly, and they'll go straight into the Lightroom app. And as you can see there at the top, they are a DNG file. Okay, so that's really, really handy and really, really useful as well. Okay, now let's do some editing. So we're going to choose this photograph here. We'll go with this forest one here. It's going to open up then for me to begin to do some work on it. So first off, we have our selective options. We've healing brush, we've got crop, we've got all these options down below at the bottom. Okay, now I don't know why they've organized it in this particular way. Usually I would expect that you have your adjustments here first of all. But you need to scroll across. Now you can also flick through the photographs very, very simply as well by simply swiping left or right, so you can edit very, very quickly that way if you prefer. Okay, so let's go with our light adjustments here first of all, and we've got light, which is your sliders, or you can go with curve as well. Okay, and you can change it to RGB, so you can change the different color channels if you want to start modifying things like shadows and so on. We won't do that for now, so we just hit back on that. Back into editing the photograph, there's a couple of things that I recommend that you do before you do any type of editing here first of all. So have a look at your options here along the top first of all. Sorry, it's just closed there. Now you can click edit, you've got info, you can rate and review if you want to add a star rating onto it and so on. Now if you're sharing this with people online as well, you can also use activity, but rare enough you're going to ever use those options. You have your information here, so you can see that it's a JPEG. You can see that the cloud version is a JPEG as well. It's synced and it's backed up. You can also pause syncing if you want to as well. You've got a share option here as well, of course, if you want to share it with anybody. But these little options here on the right hand side, I recommend that you switch on your show histogram so you can actually see the histogram. Here you've also got an option here as well to copy settings and create preset. So if you make changes to a photograph that you like and you've got another photograph that's of similar ilk, particularly if you photograph in a studio, you're probably going to have lots of photographs that are quite similar. You can copy your settings and simply paste them on to the next photograph. Very, very handy. Creating presets, very good as well. If you are using, what you'll find, even if you are using the paid version of Lightroom, you still have to buy some of the presets that are out there, and a lot of debate around presets, whether they're useful or not. They can be useful, of course, but you can make your own presets, and I think the thing about making your own presets is, of course, you're going to get your own style. Okay, so let's start off by doing some edits. We can see our histogram. There is, for this type of photograph, it's fine. It's well exposed, and we can actually see there's not much light whites are highlights here because there's not much detail there over in the right hand corner of the histogram. But I want this to be a dark, kind of moody photograph. You know, it was taken at the end of autumn going into winter, so we want to have a kind of a dark wood type of effect on it. So below we have our what we would call our local adjustment tools. First of all, we've got selective adjustments, we've got healing brush, crop, and so on. So we can crop, rotate, etc. Don't need to do any of that in this image. If you do choose selective, you need to go to the top left. You see the plus icon, and you can choose your selective options. Then we've got brush, we've got radial filter, and we've got a graduated filter as well. We might put a graduated filter on it at the end of the photograph if it needs it. We'll have a look at that stage. We want to scroll across, and we're going to go into our adjustments here. So this is where we can start to make our overall adjustments. Now you've got an auto option there, which you can go for straight away if you just want to do a very quick edit, which we don't. We're going to go into our light options, and we've got light, and as we've got curve, as we saw, and we're going to darken the exposure down here first of all. So it's just a case of clicking on it and dragging it down. As you can see with the histogram on, you can see the changes that are being made. You can also see the exposure. We've reduced it down by a stop. Now, everything is leaning towards the left-hand side, but that's fine. We can see there's no detail being lost. Detail would be lost if all the information was stacked up over on the left-hand side. If you see stacks over on the left-hand side, right on the left or right on the right, that's when you're going to lose detail. Okay, so I've gone into geometry there. We don't want to do that just yet, so we'll come back to our editing. Next, we want contrast. We're going to increase the contrast a little bit. Remember, that separates the whites and the blacks. As you can see, if I reduce the contrast, it pushes the histogram towards the middle part of the histogram. That's where our grays are. That's where our exposure is, that the middle kind of exposure. But we're going to increase it slightly, not too much, because we don't want to do too much, lose too much detail. Now we've got a little bit of a punch in the photo. We can reduce the highlights down if we want to, or we can increase them if we want to bring them back. Now I'm going to increase them slightly, because the only area really where there's any highlights in this photograph is in the distance here. It's down where the path goes back out into the light. So I'm going to keep that because that's kind of a focal point of the photograph. So it's nice to have a little bit of a focal point there. Below that, we have our shadows. We could increase the shadows if we want to bring more detail out in those shadow areas here, which I am actually going to do. Now you can also of course reduce it to get more moody, but we're not going to do that here because we're going to add a vignette to the photo later, which will allow us to kind of get that moody effect. So I'm actually going to reveal some of that detail there, not too much, and that's okay. We've got our whites and our blacks. You can really dramatically change the photograph by increasing the whites. I'm not going to increase it too much, but I am going to give it a little bit of a punch and then reduce the blacks. And again, increasing the whites and reducing the blacks will also give your photograph a little bit more contrast. Okay, so that's some basic edits there that we've done to this shot. Okay, now if at any stage you make a change that you don't like, it is possible to go to the very end or just scroll down at the bottom of the screen and you can actually reset the photograph, or you can go through their history and see the changes that you've made. Okay, so we're happy with those changes. We don't want to undo them, but it is possible to go back and undo anything at any stage by using that history option. Now, beside our light, we have our color. So let's click on color. We have black and white option. If you want to do a quick black and white conversion, which, you know, it doesn't look bad at this photograph at all, but we are going to keep it in color. So we just press the black and white option there again. We've our color, our white balance, which we should do first. You've got as shot, you've got auto, or you've got custom if you want to just manually change it by using the sliders here. What I'm going to do here instead is I'm going to use this little eyedropper here, which is over on the, sorry, I'll just go back there so you can see it. So it's just underneath the mix option there. Okay, and if I click on it, I can choose to set the white balance myself. So when I hover over parts of the photograph, you'll see how the photograph begins to change color. What we're doing here is we're telling Lightroom that the color that we're selecting is gray, and it adjusts the white balance based on that. Neutral gray should have no color cast. So when we tell Lightroom that we've selected a neutral gray, it adjusts the white balance based on that. Okay, so the path is gray. Now it's maybe perhaps not exactly neutral, but it's close enough. So I think this is good, and yeah, we can just click OK on that. So we just click the check mark there. Now, so that's an adjustment on the white balance. As you can see, it's added a little bit of green in the tint. Now we can do more than that here, just setting the white balance. We can go to mix as well. Now mix is very powerful editing option here, as we're going to see. As you can see, it's broken down into the different colors. We've got red, orange, yellow, green, etc. And these are the kind of key colors when it comes to our color wheel. We've got our primary colors, we have our secondary colors here as well, and a couple of tertiary ones too. Now if I were to select, say, we'll go with the green actually because we've got it selected. As you can see here, it's broken down then into hue, saturation and luminance. Now with hue, we can change the color to the color that's on the left or the right hand side of it on the color wheel. Now what I mean by that is I'm just going to switch off the histogram for now just so we can see it a little bit more clearly. Pay attention to the upper part of the photo where there's a little bit of green there. If I increase the hue, so if I go to the right hand side, you can see how it's becoming much more green, but it's kind of, you know, almost, I would dare to say, toxic looking kind of green, because we're kind of pushing it really into aqua territory as well. So it's mixing aqua and green, and you're getting this kind of intense green look. If I go the other way, as you can see, that green is now becoming more yellow because it's going to the other side of the color wheel where the yellow is beside it. So it works on the analogous kind of color wheel. If you remember, that's the colors that are side by side, and you're able to change it to the color that's either on the right or either on the left. We're going to increase it a little bit. We want to bring a little bit more green into the image. Now below that then we have saturation. So saturation, I could remove the color altogether by reducing it down, by bringing it to the left hand side, and that just takes it out altogether, and it takes that color out and it gives that black and white look, because, well, it is black and white. We've taken the color out from that section. So that's how you can kind of do that color pop effect if you want to get rid of all the colors but just keep one. That's one way that you could do it. I'm going to increase it slightly. I want to give a little bit more intensity to those greens. Luminance then is the brightness or the darkness of the greens. So if I reduce it down altogether, it makes those greens darker. Now you don't want to go too dark with it because they begin to look a little bit muddy. So remember, you can just pinch to zoom in on the photo. It looks a bit messy, a bit muddy. Now you can increase it, and it increases the brightness of them, and then as well, again, you don't want to go too far because you begin to lose detail. So we're going to increase it slightly, ever so slightly, to around there. Actually, no, I'm going to darken it. I want to try and put a cap on it. So we'll reduce it down a little bit, and I'm happy with all of those changes. I can click done. Now, of course, you can go and do the other colors as well. So say, for example, I might add a little bit more red to the oranges there and increase the saturation a little bit there as well. Darken them a little bit too. Now we've got a kind of nice red, natural red and green balance in the photo. Okay, so really, really happy with how that's looking at it. Click done. Those changes are applied to the shot. So we can go to our next step then, which is going to be effects. Now, effects, as you can see, we've got like things like texture, clarity, dehaze. We've also got this option called split toning, which will allow us to add colors to the highlights and to the shadows. So you can actually mix two colors together, one for the shadows, one for the highlights. I don't want to do that in this particular image because there is a natural kind of balance between the green and the red, as I just mentioned, so I don't really need to do that. But if you want to, you can get very creative with your split toning. I'm going to add a little bit of texture. Texture just brings out detail in the photo. So if I increase it slightly, because there is a lot of texture, we've got the path, we've got the leaves, the and the leaves on the ground. So we're going to increase it ever so slightly to about 20. You can also increase the clarity a little bit as well. So clarity will add mid-tone contrast, which I should bring back my histogram just to see how we're going. And that just gives it another little bit of a boost, a little bit of a punch. Dehaze is if you've got a hazy type of photograph, you can add a haze effect to it, or you can remove haze by increasing it. Gives a dramatic look to the shot, but I think it's a bit too much. I don't need it in this photograph. Then we can add a vignette, which we are going to add a vignette. So we can increase, if we go to the right on the vignette, it adds a white vignette. If we go to the left, it adds a dark vignette, which is what we want. I'm going to bring it to around there. We can change the control of the vignette then by changing the midpoint. That's where it starts from, whether it's closer to the center or if it's pushed out a little bit more to the edges. We're going to bring it in close to the center. We can feather that then, so we can make it softer, or we can go right down. And as you can see, you got a very definite defined vignette there, which we don't want. So we're going to feather it. I'm actually going to bring the midpoint down a little bit, and you can change the roundness. So that's the shape of it if you wanted a more rectangular shape, or if you wanted a more circular shape. So we're going to go slightly more circular shape, and I'm going to bring the vignette down even more, and there we go. Really dramatic looking photograph now. Again, I'm going to turn off the histogram there. Really liking how that is looking. Now you can add a little bit of grain. You can maintain highlights in the vignette if you need to as well. When you add grain, you can then change the size of the grain and so on. We're not going to do that in this instance. There's no need for us to do it in this particular shot. And then we can add a bit of sharpness. Again, if you're going to add sharpening to an image, you need to zoom in. Now, it does need a little bit of sharpening, so I'm just going to increase it slightly. Okay, so a little bit of sharpening there. Happy with how that's looking, and you can then change that sharpening by changing things like the detail, the radius, and so on. Won't get too much into that, because overall the picture is sharp. I mean, I know it doesn't look too sharp when you're that zoomed in, but you're not going to be looking at it that close. Okay, so as it is, I think if I sharpened it anymore, it would become a little bit too much. The last couple of options then, we've got lens correction options. If we need to make any lens corrections, we don't in this case, so we're going to leave it as it is. You've got geometry options as well. You can change perspectives here if you want to, by changing. If you want to go, you can change the distortion. You can give a fisheye effect if you go the other way, and so on. It takes a little bit of time to load it. I don't want to do that here. I don't want to risk changing anything here in this shot. So we're going to leave that for now, but I do encourage you to look at that option yourself then as well. You've got some presets here as well. You've got color presets, creative black and white, vignetting. Samsung even have their own ones here on it then as well. Loads of different ones if you want to just use them, if you prefer. I don't really recommend this, unless you're doing something very quick. I reckon that you should try out your edit yourself. And if you're happy with the changes that you've made, remember you can save it as a preset. You just go create preset, and you can choose what you want to leave in your preset. Okay, and you can call it whatever you like, but we're not going to do that for now. Finally, then you can go through all your previous adjustments if you want to, or you can reset the entire photograph if you want to then as well. I'm not going to do that obviously, because I wanted to keep these changes. So I'm really happy with all of those edits. I don't need to do anything else here now. I could share that photograph if I wanted to. I could save it to the device here as well if I want to. So if I want to save it, and well, let's do that now. So it's creating a copy of the photo. Okay, it's a copy of the shot. It's not the original photograph that it's going to overwrite. Lightroom won't overwrite your original shots. It's exported it, which is what's called saving in Lightroom. So I've now got a copy of that shot. Okay, if I'm finished then with that, all I can do then is I just exit that now, and it's saved those changes. So I can come back into this photograph at any stage and start doing more editing to this shot if I wanted to. It'll always keep those changes for me until I decide that I want to reset it. So I could do a completely different version of this photograph if I wanted to, and save it as a separate copy, and then have lots of different variations of this shot. So that is the Lightroom app. Still more to explore with it for sure, but that's all we're going to be able to cover in terms of Lightroom in this lesson. Let's get into having a look at Photoshop. Now, so before we move on to having a look at Photoshop, let's just have a quick check in and see where we're at with our skills. So we've covered a lot in this lesson when it comes to editing. So massive jump there in terms of our editing ability, which also allows us to get more creative then with our photographs, to kind of see beyond the capture then and fulfill our vision for what we want to do with the shot. So we're near the end of this module, so only a sliver left of skills to pick up before we complete all of the skills for this one. Now, just having a quick look at what is coming up in the next lesson. So we're going to talk all about starting a business, having a look at how you can set up a photography business for yourself. So that's going to have a look at how you can begin to start putting a portfolio together, where you can start getting clients from, how to set a budget for yourself and so on. So it's a really, really great one to check out. Even if you're already starting a business or you already have a business, you just want some tips on what you can do with your photography, how that can help to increase the amount of clients that you have. Be sure to join that lesson. Now, so our final topic then, we'll have a quick look at Photoshop Express. And what we're going to see with Photoshop Express is that it, Lightroom does the heavy lifting, and Photoshop then will be kind of for adding the tweaks. Photoshop Express is very much designed for people who just need something done very, very quickly. So, you'll see all the kind of standard exposure adjustments and so on, but there's a little bit more where you can add text to it. We can add some blur to our shots. We've got lots of preset kind of crop modes and lots of frames and so on as well. So let's dig in and get into using Photoshop. Now, before we look at Photoshop app, just the same way that we had to look at the Lightroom full version, let's have a quick look at the full version of Photoshop. And a lot of this is so that you get an understanding of the differences between these different apps and why you would be paying for something like a subscription service as opposed to using it for free. With Photoshop, there's a load of different Photoshop apps out there. There's the Photoshop Express, there's Photoshop Touch, there's Photoshop Sketch, and there's just loads and loads of them. And basically what each one of these apps is doing, it's taking different parts of Photoshop and breaking them down into smaller bite-sized chunks. Within the full version of Photoshop, we have a huge amount of tools available to us to edit photographs. Now, we can edit them, making adjustments, things like our exposures, everything that we kind of looked at within Lightroom, but there's a huge amount more we can do with it. Photoshop is a very broad program. It's not just for photographers, it's for designers, it's for people who design web pages, architects, marketers. Loads of people use Photoshop. It's a really, really broad program. So for that reason, they broke down the program into smaller apps to suit the needs of the user. So we're going to be looking at Photoshop Express in particular because that, of course, covers photography. So let's get into looking at Photoshop Express. So here is our app. So when you open up the app, it's going to ask you to open up a photograph. You can see the last photo that we edited here. But if I go to my all photos option here at the top, you can see I can actually go directly to Lightroom. Any images I have stored on the Creative Cloud, any images I have on my device. Okay, so you can open them up from pretty much anywhere. So we go into we're going to select Lightroom. We're going to choose the image that we were working on. So hopefully it's in all photos. It doesn't look like it is. Okay, so I don't know why that's happened. That's fine. It's the first image here. Okay, so we won't worry about that too much. So getting into Photoshop Express, look, I mean, on the surface, it's going to look very, very similar to Lightroom. Now, the idea of Photoshop Express, however, is that it's exactly what it sounds. It's designed to be fast. It's designed for quick edits as opposed to Lightroom, which you can get a lot more deeper into. So you start off, we have loads and loads and loads and loads of different presets. Now, not all of these are going to be available, again, depending on if you're using the free version or if you're a CC subscriber. Some of these I think you do have to pay for. Unfortunately, so you can kind of go through them. You see there's all these free ones, then you've got these different charm ones, white balance ones, black and white ones. There's just so many of them in here, and some of them are cool and some of them are unnecessary. So they're all designed though, however, to be very, very quick. It's very easily to apply to the image, but we don't need to do that, of course, because we've already done all the editing that we really need to do within Lightroom. So we can kind of concentrate on getting maybe a little bit more creative with this picture. Beside that, we have, now it's only in its beta version, as you can see, we have these different effects that we can apply to the image. We have light leaks, you've got bokeh options here as well. Okay, so you can see some of the light leaks, for example. You just click on it, takes a second for it to load up, and you can then adjust it as is needed. Now, I mean, you know, whether you use them or not is entirely up to yourself. Something like this wouldn't be too bad, say in a studio type of photograph. I don't think it's great, but you know, they do have their purpose. If you want to get rid of it, you just simply undo, you press the undo button at the top. So again, a huge amount of different options available for you there to fly through. And as you can kind of see, a lot of this Photoshop Express is just to do with filters. That said, there are some very, very useful things within this. So for example, our cropping options are very, very useful. There's a huge amount of options there. And as you can see, you've got some really good preset ones there. So Facebook profile covers, Facebook ad. So, you know, you can see directly then that if you're, you know, creating a business, you can see what very much that this is marketed towards people who perhaps wouldn't use Photoshop editing as their on a daily basis. They just want something that they can use very, very quickly. So, you know, you've got these presets options available to you already. As you can see, there are so many options available. So that is really, really useful. We're not going to crop this photograph. We don't need to. So we'll move away from the cropping into the next option here beside it, which we are looking at making our corrections. So a lot of these we won't need to go through because we've already gone through them. But as you can see, you've got some preset options with sharpening, reducing luminance, reducing color, dehaze, grain, a lot of the ones that we saw within Lightroom. So, you know, unless you're just using one of these apps on their own, I recommend that you do the changes, your exposure, your color changes, all that kind of stuff within Lightroom first. And you do any other extra changes that you want to do within Photoshop afterwards. We have a split tone option next. As we saw that in Lightroom as well. We don't need to go through that again. We will look at the blur one though, because this is something that is in Photoshop, which isn't in Lightroom. So if you have been struggling to create depth of field effects within you know, your photographs, you can absolutely do it through Photoshop. Well, type a kind of effect through Photoshop. It's not going to be exactly the same. Now, we've got full blur, which if we want to blur the entire image, all you do is select full and you can blur it that way if you like. But we don't. We want to go to the radial blur, and basically the radial blur will allow us to, as you can see here, it's a circular blur, and we can add a blur anywhere in the photograph. Now we can change the size of it by simply selecting one of the arrows. The outer circle is the feathering radius, so the further we drag it out, the larger the feathering area is going to be. The inner circle then is our actual blur, the area that won't be blurred. So everything outside of the circles will be blurred. So say we're going to blur the path here. Okay. So I'm going to increase that, and as you can see, everything around it, everything on the outside of it becomes blurry. Now there's on the top here, there's a before and after. So you can see if I click it on and off, you can very clearly see the difference there. Okay, so you can adapt that then as you prefer. I'm going to drag it out a little bit, just have a little bit of blur at the edges. Okay. Great, so I'm happy with how that looks. Next then, you can move on to your vignette. We don't need to add one of those, but you can see the same options here then again. So that's all your kind of corrections, your adjustments there. The only one that's really kind of any different here compared to Lightroom is that blur option. Now, if we go to the next one then, at the bottom one, you can do some basic changes here as well. Okay, so if we were to zoom in on the photograph, you can begin to get rid of some things in the shot. There's nothing here to get rid of, but all you need to do is touch the photograph, the area you want to remove, and it should remove it for you. You can also increase and decrease the size of the area, as you can see there. And there you go, you just tap on it, and then you can see it'll try to best replicate it as it can. Okay, not really doing a great job there at all, but it can be very, very effective when you are editing portraits, but we want to undo that. Okay, so that's another option there for you. We then also have our red eye, our pet eye, obviously none of that in this image, and then we have our text. So with our text, there's a huge amount of options available for us. You've got some presets here already. As you can see, you just kind of click them off. Oh, we've got too many there, so we don't want that. You just tap on it to change the text. We don't want that though. We want to close it out. There we go. So you can just tap one of the one on the top left is to change the text. The one on the bottom right, or sorry, the bottom left is to rotate it. You can make it larger or smaller, or you can just close it out altogether. Okay, so there's a huge amount of options here. As you can see, again, some of these maybe if you're using the free version, you may need to unlock them. Okay, so that's actually not a bad one for this style of photograph, I must say. Looks okay. All right, so I'm not going to add text to this, but you can change the font. So you can just select your font here, and then you can go to the different font styles. Huge amount of options available for you. You can change the colors, of course. So you try to find one that maybe still stood out. Probably going to be white in this case. As you can see, there's a huge amount of colors available to you. And you can change the alignment then. So just like Word, you know, you can have it left, you can have it right. Okay, so we're not going to do that. But as you can see, there's great potential there with using your the font option there when it comes to Photoshop. Then you've got some other options. You've got stickers, so if you want to pop in flowers, different designs. So if you are kind of more into the design side of things here, very, very simple to add them into the shot. If you've used Instagram or any kind of editing option, you know, you're going to be very, very familiar with these. So like you could put in, you know, a splash like that. Again, you can just rotate it. Not a huge amount that you can do with them, to be honest, you know, but they can add a little bit more fun, you know, particularly if you're doing a type of design. Finally then, one thing that I really like using Photoshop for, like the blur tool is great, but also is the frames that are available. So as you can see here, you've got some basic ones here, your vignettes as we saw before. So some thin frames. You've got edges here as well, and you've got frames then the whole way through. So there's a huge amount of different options available to you there. Some of these are great, you know, if you're posting onto Instagram, just to give you a kind of a preset crop almost already. I like the circular one as well. It's also an interesting idea. But I think the one that really, really works is this matte one here, which gives it a kind of classic look of a kind of fine art type of print. So I'm going to go with that one. Really like that particular one, but there's a huge options, again, a huge amount of options available for you. So if you're happy with all the changes, then all you need to do is go to export. As you can see, you've got a huge amount of options here again that you can choose. You know, if you want to go to Creative Cloud, you can send them into Lightroom, so you can open it up into Lightroom, save it into your gallery, or open it directly into Instagram. You can add a logo onto it as well if you want to, or you can, as you can see, it goes into the very, it's hard to see it on this, but it goes into the very, very top left hand corner, you know, if you wanted to do that, which, you know, we don't want to do that, but yeah, you can put a stamp on them if you like. So there you go, loads and loads of options available for you, and we're just going to save this to gallery. So I'll have another copy of it. Now you can also see the JPEG quality is at 85. Now I could increase that. All you need to do is tap on it and you can increase it, set it to maximum. But again, you know, if you're posting this online, you're not going to need to save it very, very large. So that's that. That is how we can use PS Express. As you can see, a lot less to do in it when we're using it in conjunction with Lightroom, because most of the changes that we're going to need to make are going to be done with in Lightroom. Now I don't need to save this because I've already saved it. Now, unsurprisingly, another marathon lesson, a huge amount that we had to cover in that, but I do hope that you found it useful. Looking at what's coming ahead in our final lesson of this module, we're looking at starting a photography business. So don't worry, it's not going to be as dull as it looks here, but it is going to be very, very important. We're going to have a look at how you can just get yourself set up and things to think about, that you can do with your photography now at this stage, and how you might make a supplementary income for yourself with your photography that might lead on to something a little bit bigger. Now, well done on completing lesson number 7 as usual. Any questions or anything like that, please email us at support@shawacademy.com. I have a challenge for you, as always. I'd like you to edit a photograph to the Lightroom app and show us a before and after. So show us the image before you edit it, and then show us an after on that image as well. So Shaw Smart Photo, as usual. Please post it to Twitter and Instagram, and also tag us on Facebook as well. So well done on completing lesson number 7. Just one lesson left to go in this module. So I'll see you all back again here very, very soon for lesson number 8 in the Smart Fun Photography course. Until then, take care of yourselves. Bye bye.